On a crisp autumn evening in October 1985, 9-year-old Rebecca Martinez vanished without a trace after her weekly ballet class at the prestigious Riverside Dance Academy in downtown Seattle, leaving behind only her pink ballet slippers and a mystery that would haunt the Pacific Northwest for nearly a decade. Rebecca, a talented and dedicated young dancer with dreams of performing with the Seattle Ballet, had just finished her advanced beginner class under the tutelage of the renowned instructor Madame Volkov, a former prima ballerina from the Bolshoi Theater who had immigrated to America in the 1970s. That evening, Rebecca's mother, Carmen, was running late due to heavy traffic on Interstate 5, and when she arrived at the academy at 7:45 p.m., she found the building eerily quiet, with most of the lights turned off and no sign of her daughter anywhere. Where are you reading from? Share your city and country in the comments before we continue this story. The academy's front desk was unmanned. The studios were empty, and Rebecca's street clothes remained neatly folded in her assigned cubby in the changing room, suggesting she had never changed out of her leotard and tights after class ended. Security cameras at the academy had mysteriously malfunctioned that evening, showing only static during the crucial hours between 6:30 p.m. when class ended and 8 p.m. when Carmen arrived, eliminating any visual record of what had happened to the young dancer. The initial police investigation revealed that several other students and parents had left the building by 7 p.m., but none remembered seeing Rebecca after the class concluded, creating a puzzling gap in the timeline that investigators struggled to explain. Madame Volkov, who had been teaching at the academy for over 15 years with an impeccable reputation, told police that Rebecca had seemed perfectly normal during class and had mentioned looking forward to the upcoming recital where she would perform a solo piece. The search for Rebecca involved hundreds of volunteers, police dogs, and even psychics, who claimed to have visions of the missing girl. But despite the massive effort and extensive media coverage, no trace of Rebecca was found in the weeks and months that followed her disappearance. 8 years later, in a moment that would change everything, Madame Volkov would finally break her silence and reveal a terrifying secret that she had kept hidden since that fateful October night. A revelation that would expose a web of deception and danger that had been lurking within the walls of the prestigious dance academy. The investigation into Rebecca Martinez's disappearance quickly became one of Seattle's most perplexing missing child cases, involving federal agents, child psychologists, and specialized search teams who exhaustively combed through every inch of the surrounding Capitol Hill neighborhood. Detective James Sullivan, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience in missing persons cases, led the investigation with methodical precision, interviewing family members, teachers, students, and anyone who had contact with Rebecca in the weeks before her disappearance. The interviews revealed that Rebecca had been an exceptionally happy and well-adjusted child with no behavioral problems or signs of distress, making her sudden vanishing even more baffling for investigators who typically looked for patterns of family dysfunction, abuse, or previous attempts to run away from home. Carmen and Roberto Martinez underwent extensive questioning and polygraph tests, both passing without any indication of deception, though the stress of the investigation and their daughter's disappearance began to take a devastating toll on their marriage and mental health. The search expanded to include registered sex offenders in the area, transients who might have been passing through the neighborhood, and even family friends who had access to information about Rebecca's schedule and activities at the dance academy. Rebecca's bedroom was processed multiple times by forensic specialists who found no evidence of planning for a departure, no packed belongings, and no signs that Rebecca had been preparing to leave home, suggesting that whatever happened had been sudden and completely unexpected. The dance academy itself was thoroughly searched, with investigators examining every studio, storage room, and office space, but they found no evidence of foul play or any indication that Rebecca had been harmed on the premises. Other students and their families were interviewed extensively, but none reported seeing anything unusual or suspicious on the evening of Rebecca's disappearance, creating a frustrating absence of witnesses or evidence that might have provided crucial clues. The case received extensive media coverage throughout the Pacific Northwest, including features on national television programs about missing children. But despite the widespread publicity and numerous tips from the public, no credible leads emerged that brought investigators closer to finding Rebecca. As months turned into years, the active investigation was gradually scaled back, though Detective Sullivan continued to review the case periodically and follow up on any new information that might surface, never giving up hope that someday the truth would be revealed. The Martinez family struggled to maintain normalcy while living with the constant uncertainty about Rebecca's fate, attending support groups for families of missing children, and keeping Rebecca's room exactly as she had left it, hoping against hope that their daughter would somehow find her way home. The years following Rebecca's disappearance were marked by a gradual erosion of hope and the slow disintegration of the Martinez family as they struggled to cope with the unbearable uncertainty and grief of not knowing what had happened to their beloved daughter. Carmen became obsessed with maintaining Rebecca's room as a shrine, refusing to move or change anything, spending hours sitting on the small bed surrounded by ballet posters and trophies while talking to her missing daughter, as if she might somehow hear her mother's voice across the void. Roberto threw himself into his work as a construction foreman, taking on extra projects and working long hours that kept him away from the house where every corner reminded him of Rebecca's laughter, her pirouettes in the living room, and her excited chatter about her dreams of becoming a professional ballerina. The couple's marriage began to deteriorate under the weight of their shared grief and different coping mechanisms, with Carmen becoming increasingly withdrawn and Roberto growing more distant, both afraid to express their fears that Rebecca might never come home alive. Support groups for families of missing children provided some comfort, but Carmen often found herself unable to relate to parents whose children had been found, whether alive or deceased, because at least they had answers while she remained trapped in an endless limbo of not knowing. The annual vigils and awareness events organized by the Seattle community gradually became smaller as public attention moved to other tragedies and newer cases, leaving the Martinez family feeling increasingly isolated in their ongoing nightmare that seemed to have no end. Carmen continued to visit the Riverside Dance Academy regularly, sitting in the parking lot and watching other children attend their classes, hoping to catch a glimpse of Rebecca or to find some clue that everyone else had missed during the initial investigation. Madame Volkov, who had initially been supportive and helpful during the investigation, gradually became more distant and evasive when Carmen tried to discuss Rebecca's disappearance, claiming that talking about the tragedy was too painful and disruptive to her other students. The dance academy itself underwent several changes in ownership and management over the years, but Carmen noticed that Madame Volkov remained as the head instructor, seemingly unaffected by the tragedy that had occurred under her watch. Private investigators hired by the family explored various theories, ranging from stranger abduction to human trafficking, but their efforts yielded no concrete results and only served to drain the family's savings while providing false hope that eventually led to deeper despair. Roberto eventually moved out of the family home, unable to bear the constant reminders of Rebecca and the growing distance between him and Carmen, though he continued to provide financial support and maintained hope that their daughter would someday be found. In the spring of 1993, 8 years after Rebecca's disappearance, a series of events began to unfold that would finally shed light on the mystery that had consumed the Martinez family and the Seattle community for nearly a decade. The catalyst came when another young student at the Riverside Dance Academy, 10-year-old Sarah Chen, confided to her parents that she felt uncomfortable around Madame Volkov's assistant, a man named Victor Petrov, who helped with costume fittings and backstage preparations for recitals. Sarah's parents, aware of the Rebecca Martinez case and concerned about their daughter's safety, immediately contacted the police and demanded a thorough background check on all Academy staff members. The investigation revealed that Victor Petrov had been working at the Academy since 1984, 1 year before Rebecca's disappearance, and that his background check had been falsified, hiding a criminal record that included charges for inappropriate conduct with minors in his native Russia. When confronted with this information, Madame Volkov initially claimed ignorance about Petrov's past, but under pressure from police and the threat of losing her business license, she finally agreed to cooperate with investigators. In a private meeting with Detective Sullivan, who had never closed Rebecca's case, Madame Volkov made a shocking revelation that would change everything the investigators thought they knew about that October night in 1985. She confessed that she had been aware of Viktor Petrov's inappropriate behavior toward young students for years, but had been too afraid to report it because Petrov had been blackmailing her with evidence of her own illegal immigration status and forged credentials. On the night of Rebecca's disappearance, Madame Volkov had witnessed Petrov luring the young girl into a storage room under the pretense of helping her with a costume fitting for the upcoming recital. When she heard Rebecca crying and went to investigate, she found Petrov attempting to assault the child, and in the struggle that followed, Rebecca had fallen and struck her head on a concrete floor, suffering what appeared to be a fatal injury. Terrified of the consequences and fearing deportation, Madame Volkov had helped Petrov dispose of Rebecca's body in a remote location outside the city, and they had both maintained their silence for 8 years while continuing to work together at the academy. The revelation that Rebecca had died as a result of a sexual assault attempt and that her body had been hidden by people she trusted sent shockwaves through the Seattle community and reignited the investigation with new urgency and determination. The confession by Madame Volkov led to the immediate arrest of Viktor Petrov, who was found living under an assumed name in a small apartment near the University of Washington, where he had been working as a janitor while continuing to prey on young women in the area. When confronted with Madame Volkov's testimony and faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, Petrov initially denied any involvement in Rebecca's death, but eventually broke down under interrogation and provided a detailed account of what had happened that October night. According to Petrov's confession, he had been grooming Rebecca for weeks, gaining her trust by offering her special attention and promising her starring roles in upcoming recitals, a pattern of behavior that investigators later discovered he had used with several other young students. On the night of her disappearance, Petrov had convinced Rebecca to stay after class for a special rehearsal and had lured her into a storage room where he attempted to sexually assault her. But Rebecca had fought back with surprising strength and determination for a 9-year-old child. During the struggle, Rebecca had managed to break free and run toward the door, but Petrov had caught her, and in his attempt to silence her screams, had pushed her violently against a wall, causing her to fall and strike her head on the concrete floor with fatal force. Panicked by what he had done and fearing discovery, Petrov had enlisted Madame Volkov's help in covering up the crime, threatening to expose her illegal status if she refused to cooperate with his plan to dispose of the body. Together they had wrapped Rebecca's body in old dance costumes and transported it in Petrov's van to a remote wooded area in the Cascade Mountains, where they had buried her in a shallow grave that they believed would never be discovered. For 8 years, both Petrov and Madame Volkov had lived with the knowledge of their crime, continuing to work with children while knowing that they had taken the life of an innocent young girl and destroyed a family. The investigation that followed Petrov's confession involved extensive searches of the area he had described, and after several days of intensive searching with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, investigators finally located Rebecca's remains in a remote section of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. The discovery of Rebecca's body provided the physical evidence needed to corroborate the confessions and ensure that both Petrov and Madame Volkov would face justice for their crimes, while finally giving the Martinez family the closure they had desperately needed for 8 long years. The trial of Viktor Petrov and Madame Volkov became a landmark case in Washington state, drawing national attention to issues of child safety and extracurricular activities, and the importance of thorough background checks for anyone working with minors. Petrov was charged with first-degree murder, attempted sexual assault of a minor, and tampering with evidence, while Madame Volkov faced charges of accessory to murder, tampering with evidence, and child endangerment for her role in covering up the crime and allowing Petrov to continue working with children. The prosecution, led by King County District Attorney Patricia Williams, presented a compelling case that included the defendant's detailed confessions, physical evidence from Rebecca's burial site, and testimony from other young students who had been victimized by Petrov over the years. The defense teams attempted to argue that Petrov's actions were not premeditated and that Madame Volkov had been coerced into helping him. But the evidence showed a pattern of predatory behavior and deliberate cover-up that contradicted claims of accident or duress. Carmen Martinez's testimony was the most powerful moment of the trial, as she described 8 years of anguish and uncertainty, the destruction of her marriage, and the devastating impact of not knowing what had happened to her daughter. She spoke directly to the defendants, asking them how they could have continued working with children while knowing what they had done to Rebecca, and expressing her belief that other families might have been spared similar tragedies if they had come forward sooner. The testimony of other victims and their families revealed the extent of Petrov's predatory behavior and the culture of silence and fear that had allowed him to continue his crimes for years without being stopped. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of childhood sexual abuse, the trauma experienced by families of missing children, and the long-term effects of unresolved grief on survivors like the Martinez family. After 6 weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury found both defendants guilty on all charges, with Petrov receiving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, and Madame Volkov receiving 25 years for her role in the cover-up. The verdicts were seen as a victory for child protection advocates and sent a strong message that those who harm children and those who help cover up such crimes would face the full weight of the law. The case also led to significant changes in how dance academies and other youth programs conduct background checks and monitor staff interactions with students, helping to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The resolution of Rebecca Martinez's case had profound and lasting effects on child protection policies and safety protocols in youth programs throughout Washington state and across the United States, transforming how institutions approach the screening and supervision of adults who work with children. Carmen Martinez channeled her grief and anger into advocacy work, establishing the Rebecca Martinez Foundation to support families of missing children and to promote stronger safety measures in extracurricular programs, particularly in the arts where children often work closely with adult instructors and staff. The foundation developed comprehensive safety guidelines for dance schools, music programs, and other youth activities, emphasizing the importance of transparent communication, proper supervision, and creating environments where children feel safe reporting inappropriate behavior. Carmen also worked closely with law enforcement agencies to improve missing child investigations, advocating for faster response times, better coordination between agencies, and more thorough background checks for anyone working in positions of trust with minors. The Rebecca Martinez case became a standard study in criminal justice and child psychology programs, illustrating how predators can exploit positions of authority and trust, and how institutional failures can enable continued abuse while preventing victims from getting help. Enhanced background check procedures were implemented across Washington state, requiring fingerprinting, criminal history reviews, and reference checks for all employees and volunteers working with children in educational, recreational, and cultural programs. The case also led to mandatory reporting training for all staff members in youth programs, ensuring that adults who witness or suspect abuse know their legal obligations and have the tools to report concerns effectively. Child advocacy organizations used Rebecca's story to develop new educational programs for children, teaching them about personal safety, appropriate boundaries with adults, and the importance of telling trusted adults when something makes them feel uncomfortable. The Riverside Dance Academy was permanently closed following the trial, and the building was eventually converted into a community center that offers free programs for at-risk youth, serving as a positive transformation of a place that had been associated with tragedy. Carmen Martinez became a nationally recognized expert on child safety and youth programs, consulting with organizations across the country and speaking at conferences about the lessons learned from her daughter's case and the importance of creating cultures of safety and accountability. The annual Rebecca Martinez Memorial Walk became a major event in Seattle, drawing thousands of participants who honor Rebecca's memory while raising funds for missing children organizations and child safety programs. Roberto Martinez, who had struggled with guilt and depression following Rebecca's disappearance, found healing through his involvement in the foundation's work and eventually reconciled with Carmen, their shared mission helping them rebuild their relationship on a foundation of purpose and hope. 10 years after the resolution of Rebecca's case, the impact of her story continued to influence child protection practices and policies across multiple sectors. While the Rebecca Martinez Foundation had grown into a national organization, providing resources and support to hundreds of families dealing with missing children cases, the foundation's safety protocols had been adopted by thousands of youth programs across the country, creating standardized procedures for background checks, supervision, and incident reporting that had prevented numerous cases of abuse and exploitation. Carmen Martinez had remarried a fellow advocate she met through her foundation work, finding love again while maintaining her commitment to honoring Rebecca's memory through continued service to other families facing similar tragedies. The foundation's educational programs had been implemented in schools and community organizations nationwide, teaching children about personal safety in age-appropriate ways that empowered them to protect themselves without creating unnecessary fear about the adults in their lives. Advanced investigative techniques developed partly in response to Rebecca's case had been used to solve dozens of other missing persons cases, proving that improvements inspired by one tragedy could have far-reaching benefits for many other families seeking answers. Viktor Petrov remained in prison, where he had been attacked multiple times by other inmates who learned about his crimes against children, suffering injuries that left him permanently disabled but alive to serve his full sentence. Madame Volkov had been deported to Russia after serving her sentence, where she lived in obscurity and poverty, reportedly suffering from severe depression and guilt over her role in Rebecca's death and the cover-up that followed. The site where Rebecca's body had been found was converted into a memorial garden, where families could come to remember missing children and find peace in a beautiful natural setting dedicated to hope and healing. Carmen regularly visited Rebecca's grave, which had become a pilgrimage site for other parents who had lost children, finding comfort in sharing stories and supporting each other through the ongoing process of grief and recovery. The case had inspired several books, documentaries, and television movies that helped educate the public about missing children issues while treating Rebecca's story with the respect and dignity that her memory deserved. Law enforcement agencies credited the Rebecca Martinez case with improving their approach to missing children investigations, leading to faster identification of suspects, better preservation of evidence, and more effective coordination between local, state, and federal agencies. The dance community had undergone significant reforms as a result of Rebecca's case, with professional organizations implementing strict codes of conduct, mandatory training programs, and zero-tolerance policies for inappropriate behavior that had made dance education safer for children across the country. 15 years after Rebecca's death, her story had become a cornerstone of missing children advocacy and had influenced international protocols for investigating cases involving trusted adults and institutional cover-ups. The Rebecca Martinez Foundation had expanded globally, working with organizations in 8 countries to develop culturally appropriate safety education programs and to support families dealing with missing children cases regardless of their geographic location or economic circumstances. Carmen Martinez had been honored with numerous awards for her advocacy work, including recognition from the United Nations for her contributions to child protection efforts and her role in developing new international standards for youth program safety. The investigative techniques and safety protocols developed in response to Rebecca's case had been adopted by youth organizations worldwide, contributing to a significant reduction in reported cases of abuse and exploitation in structured programs for children. Universities around the world included Rebecca's case in their criminology, psychology, and education curricula, using her story to teach students about institutional responsibility, the importance of speaking up when witnessing wrongdoing, and the long-term consequences of failing to protect children. The memorial garden at the site where Rebecca's body was found had become a place of healing for hundreds of families, with support groups meeting regularly to share experiences and provide mutual support for those dealing with loss, trauma, and the ongoing challenges of rebuilding their lives. Viktor Petrov's case had been studied extensively by criminal psychologists, trying to understand how predators operate within institutional settings, leading to improved screening procedures and intervention programs designed to identify and stop potential offenders before they can harm children. Technology companies had developed new safety applications and monitoring systems inspired by Rebecca's case, including better communication tools for reporting concerns and tracking systems that help parents and organizations maintain awareness of children's whereabouts during activities. Carmen's second marriage had brought stability and happiness back into her life, though she continued to honor Rebecca's memory through her foundation work and by sharing her story with other parents who needed hope and guidance during their darkest moments. The annual Rebecca Martinez Memorial Conference had become one of the most important gatherings for professionals working in child protection, bringing together law enforcement officers, educators, child psychologists, victim advocates, and family members to share knowledge and develop new strategies for keeping children safe. Rebecca's story had proven that even in the most tragic circumstances, one life could make a difference, inspiring changes that protected countless other children and provided hope for families who might otherwise have given up their search for truth and justice. Today, nearly 4 decades after Rebecca Martinez's disappearance, her legacy continues to protect children and support families around the world through the ongoing work of the foundation that bears her name and the countless professionals who have been inspired by her story. Carmen Martinez, now a grandmother herself, continues to lead the foundation while also mentoring other parents who have lost children, sharing the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving unimaginable loss and finding purpose in helping others navigate similar tragedies. The Riverside Dance Academy building, now the Rebecca Martinez Community Center, serves hundreds of at-risk youth each year with programs designed to provide safe spaces for learning, creativity, and personal growth, transforming a place of tragedy into a beacon of hope and opportunity. Advanced safety protocols originally developed for Rebecca's case are now standard practice in youth organizations worldwide and have been instrumental in preventing thousands of cases of abuse and exploitation, proving that her death was not in vain. The Rebecca Martinez Safety Education Program is taught in over 30,000 schools globally, having reached millions of children with age-appropriate lessons about personal safety, trusted adults, and the importance of speaking up when something doesn't feel right or safe. Viktor Petrov died in prison in 2019, taking with him any additional secrets about his crimes, but leaving behind a legacy of pain that continues to motivate advocates like Carmen to work tirelessly to protect other children from similar fates. The memorial garden where Rebecca's body was found has been expanded into a full retreat center that provides counseling, support groups, and healing programs for families affected by missing children cases, serving as a living testament to the possibility of finding hope and purpose even in the aftermath of unimaginable tragedy. Rebecca's case is still studied in law enforcement academies as an example of how persistence, attention to detail, and refusing to give up can eventually lead to justice, even when years have passed and hope seems lost to everyone involved. The annual conference in Rebecca's honor has become a global gathering that brings together experts from every continent to share research, develop new technologies, and coordinate international efforts to protect children and support families dealing with missing persons cases. Carmen often speaks about the importance of never giving up hope while also preparing for difficult truths. Describing her journey from devastated mother to international advocate as proof that love can triumph over even the darkest evil. Rebecca's story reminds the world that every child deserves protection, every family deserves answers, and every case deserves the persistent attention of caring professionals who refuse to give up until the truth is found and justice is served. Her legacy lives on in every safety protocol that prevents harm, every family that finds closure, every child who learns to speak up about inappropriate behavior, and every adult who chooses to act when they witness something wrong, proving that even the shortest life can have the most profound and lasting impact on the world.